The second constitutional crisis was the Great Depression. And we had we had just come out of a World War I, which was a cataclysmic event. Um, that's when America was then thrust onto a global stage because we had largely been insular before then. You had this unprecedented economic meltdown. And you saw the power in the executive branch once again expand. FDR, for all his greatness, grabbed a huge amount of executive power, and he tried to use that power to some people say usurp the powers of Congress or the courts. FDR famously, well, first of all, he was, elected over and over and over again, which
Right.
led to term limits, which is exactly what the founders feared. They didn't want a president for life. Now there was extraordinary circumstances, and there was the Great Depression, and they're leading us into World War II then, and there's a question of whether America would even survive that war. So there, thankfully, by and large, FDR was an honorable man, and I believe had the country's best interests at heart. But he did shift the balance of power. The checks and balances. All three branches are supposed to be equal, in their power and in how they're checked by the other branches. Well, the power shifted more towards the executive branch. FDR tried to pack the Supreme Court. He tried to expand the Supreme Court. There's nothing in the Constitution that says there has to be 9 justices. There's
Right.
been less than 9. There's been more than 9. But the way FDR wanted it, it would have been like 20 justices, and of course, beholden to him and his agendas. His policies were not well received in Congress a lot of the times. They were sweeping executive orders, to put people to work and to invest in infrastructure. They were all, by and large, good policy, creating Social Security, all these things. But when Congress would balk and say, "Hey, wait a minute, we make the laws here, and we got to debate these things, and we have to do our process," FDR said, "No, we're in an emergency. I'm just going to go ahead and do it anyways." That's testing the limits of the balance of power. That's a constitutional crisis.
Right.
And the third constitutional crisis, which many believe we are in right now, is the one can say that it's two-part. Number one, it's the complete abdication of honorable intention by the Republican Party as a whole, and two, the election of Donald Trump, who has complete and total disdain for our federalist system. He's ignorant of the Constitution. What parts of the Constitution he does understand, he completely rejects. I always tell people, the Constitution isn't like your Christian Bible. You don't get to pick what parts you follow and what parts you ignore. And that's exactly what's happening today. And so, especially in the last 30 days, 40 days, we can really see now that we're in the midst of a constitutional crisis. And just in the last week, the threats that this president has made really shake the foundations of what this country believes to be appropriate power that a president has.
Well, I find it almost ironic that the first 2 constitutional crises were solved by an expansion of executive power, but this third one, it's only going to be solved if we can begin to reduce the expansion of executive power. Because, if it's gotten to a point that Now they're making a case in front of the Supreme Court that the president can't even be investigated for anything. So executive power has gotten to the point that it is, it's threatening the checks and balances that were established. And I don't think our founders had ever dreamed that there would be a entire party complicit in the authoritarianism that, or I can't say the authoritarianism, the expansion of executive power to the point that
To the
that the
point of
checks and balances.
authoritism.
Yeah, to the point of authoritarianism, because the impeachment failed. I mean, they should have gone after him for different things, in my view. There was the issue that they went after him with. I mean, even though legally it was a sound argument, they just lost that narrative battle with the everyday American.
Well,
It seemed like it was too complex for a lot of people to follow.
yeah, but that doesn't really matter because the people weren't trying the president. Um, I'll backtrack. You hit it right on the head. Each constitutional crisis is kind of, it's not started by, but it's revealed by the use of power by the executive branch that in some way expands power. Lincoln grabbed a lot of power to do a lot of things, especially very early on in the conflict and even before the Civil War. That really caused a lot of concern. FDR as well. The difference between what we have now and the difference between FDR and Lincoln is that Lincoln and FDR were at their basis honorable men who
Right.
had genuine concern for the country and did their best. They made mistakes. They did a lot of things that were, in today's view, might have been, uh, over the line, but they were men of honor. And that is where Trump is lacking. And that is where, the courts and Congress steadily gave more and more power to the executive because they couldn't conceive a time where the executive would be dishonorable. So basically, they allowed the executive branch to police itself, which by and large worked until we got to Trump, who has no honor. And that is where we're in a truly difficult stage. And when you mentioned the impeachment process failed not because they brought the wrong charges or they couldn't prove those charges. It's because the jury was not impartial. It and it's designed that way. The framers designed it that way. I heard the terms thrown around a lot about that this was a partisan impeachment. Well, of course it was. It's not a legal process. It's not a court process. It is a political remedy.
Yeah.
That's how it was designed. The problem is that the founders were abhorrent to the thought of what they called factions. If Jefferson and Adams and Ben Franklin can look at today, the thing that would horrify them the most is that we have a two-party system, and they did everything they could to discourage that, and they basically felt that the American citizens would see and recognize when a mistake had been made. In other words, a bad president was elected,
Mhm.
and ultimately correct the problem. Same thing with Congress. Bad Congress people were elected, and they trusted in the people to remedy that. It might take a few years, but by and large, that worked until it didn't work. And part of it is the divisiveness that has crept into American society. Part of that has to do with the information that is available at people's fingertips. A lot of it is fake information or very specifically directed information to confirm one agenda or another. So now we're at a point where we can't trust the people to make the right decision, and we can't trust Congress to make the right decision. And on top of that, we have a president who's legally and morally and ethically dangerous. And so these unseen checks on the limits of power have been eroded away at the same time that the executive branch has been handed more and more power as time went on by Congress and by the judiciary. So now we're in a real pickle. Um, and the one thing I can say though is hopefully that is starting to rebound. And what gives me hope is that General Mattis stood up, uh, a steadfast, loyal soldier, loyal to his commander in chief. What
Mhm.
extraordinary circumstances led General Mattis to severely publicly rebuke a sitting president and basically call him a danger to the Constitution uh, ideals of the country? And then we have Secretary of Defense Mark Esper also standing up. And now Lisa Murkowski has stood up and said, I don't even know if I'm going to vote for Trump. She's a Republican congresswoman. And so
Right.
now you're starting to get these uh, even partisan uh, pushback. So only time will tell if that's going to be enough to start, turning the tide.